Greetings, everybody. John, thank you so much for joining us today. Earlier today, we had a conversation with a number of players, and I asked one of your former colleagues, Matt Owen, I guess, to judge if the United States was on a scale of 10 and our next biggest adversary were to be judged on a scale of 1 to 10, where would he put them? And he said he'd give the next biggest threat a 7. And as you're out there prosecuting terror cases and sort of look, sort of like the Wizard of Oz, you know what's going on around the world, what's Russia doing, what ISIS is doing, what domestic players in the United States are doing. How would you rate the next biggest threat to the United States on a 1 to 10 scale?
Well, I think when you think about what the threat picture is now, that we are facing a more complicated threat picture than we've ever faced before, and that's a consensus across the intelligence and law enforcement community. Let me give you one case as an example of how...
Is his microphone on? I hear me. Yeah, your mic is definitely not on. Now maybe you're on. Sing a few bars.
It's one way to
there you go.
Avoid trouble is just not to turn on the microphone. It's good operational
Department of Justice protocol, right? Yeah. So who's the next biggest threat?
I'd say if you look now at the threat picture that we're facing, it's the most complicated threat picture that we've faced, period. And that's a consensus across the intelligence community and law enforcement. And let me give one case as an example of what we're facing today that's quite different than what the threat picture looked like when my division was created, the National Security Division, which is the first new litigating division at the Department of Justice in about 50 years, was created as one of the post 9/11 reforms. And our 10-year anniversary is actually this September 14th, next week. And so when we were first created, we focused very much on tearing down the wall that had existed between law enforcement and intelligence prior to 9/11 that made it difficult to share information across the federal government. Mm-hmm. As we move to the next threat, it's a different, more complicated threat that involves the private sector. Imagine today you're at a company, and inside your company you see that a hacker has gotten into your system. And the hacker has stolen a relatively small amount of personally identifiable information, names, addresses, that type of thing. And your IT guys say, this isn't particularly sophisticated, they kicked them out of the system. Then you get a threat through email that says, commercial provider, let's say it's Gmail, and the threat says, pay me $500 through Bitcoin, or I'm going to embarrass you by releasing the information. The vast majority of companies today pay the $500 or decide not to pay the $500 because they don't take it seriously and they move on. Unsophisticated hacker, what's the big deal? They do not tell anyone in government. They do not tell anyone in law enforcement. But this case, which is a real case, they did do the right thing and they worked with the federal government. And if they hadn't done that, what they would never have found out is that on the other end was not some low-level crook or criminal hacker, but instead it was a guy named Farizi, a Kosovo extremist who had moved to Malaysia, from Malaysia had hacked into this company. And what he was doing with this personally identifiable information, he wasn't looking to just make a buck, although he did. He was providing it on the back end to one of the most notorious cyber terrorists in the world at the time, a man named Junaid Hussain, a British-born citizen who had moved to Raqqa, Syria, where he was located at the heart of the Islamic State of the Levant. And what he was doing wasn't cashing in. Instead, he was culling through that list.
So Bitcoin extortion was fueling ISIS in Raqqa?
Worse than that. So it's not just that the extortion can fuel ISIS in Raqqa. He was culling through the list of stolen names, addresses, looking for the names of government employees, and then again using US-made technology, blasting it back to the United States in the way that we see now in the current threat, which is the crowdsourcing of terrorism. So using Twitter, he then says, kill these names, kill these government employees where they live, and calls upon their adherents to do it inside the United States. That's what the threat looks like now. It moves very fast. Data moves very quickly. It's exploiting US-made technology. It crosses 5 or 6 different countries. It requires coordination not just federally and with foreign partners, but with the private sector. Because they worked with us in this case, we were able to take effective action. And Farizi, the defendant who was responsible for that, was arrested in Malaysia pursuant to US charges, and then thanks to the cooperation of the Malaysians, brought to the United States, where he pled guilty for conspiring to commit that terrorist act. And Junaid Hussain was killed in a military strike by CENTCOM in Raqqa, Syria, where he was located in the Islamic State of Levant. We can take effective action, but it's incredibly difficult.
How many cases like that do you have underway?
So if you think about cases linked to this change in strategy, the crowdsourcing of terrorism versus the focus on large-scale spectacular attacks, since about the end of 2013 when they changed strategy, we've brought over 100 federal cases across the United States, 60 of those last year alone. That's more international terrorism cases than we've ever brought before. And what we see in the United States is that it's not linked to one geographic or ethnic geographic area or ethnic group. We've brought them in over 35 different districts across the country. The common factor, two factors, and they're linked, is one, the age of the defendants. So over 50% of the defendants are 25 or younger, and most troubling, 1/3 are 21 or younger. And I think that's very much linked to the second phenomenon, which is this is because of the exploitation of social media. The common factor in almost every one of these cases is the international terrorist exploitation of social media and how that played a role in taking someone from ideas to the step where they want to take violent action. And that used to be the assessment of the intelligence community when I was doing this back at the FBI, was that you couldn't get someone to move from idea to violence without meeting them in the real world, personal connection. That's clearly not the case for the generation who's forming all sorts of friendships entirely online. Much for good, but we have a terrorist group who's seeking to exploit that as a vulnerability.
John, let me ask you a question, because you can raise cases like this, which are so compelling. But we have a discussion both today and I think in society in general about what the right equilibrium is between awareness and a kind of proactive step on just getting ourselves around what we need to do by way of surveillance and national security decisions versus the kind of classic liberties that are core to what the country is about. I mean, you're out there litigating and prosecuting very bad cases. And I'm sort of interested in how, I know you're in the government, but we had debates about the Patriot Act. We were discussing earlier what provisions have given back. What do you need to do your job that you don't have today? And what powers have you been given that you wish you hadn't been given to actually be true to what the country's about?
Well, I think we are true to what the country's about. And one thing that's an amazing experience for the folks in our division and working at the Department of Justice is drilled into from the moment that you first swear the oath to protect and defend the Constitution is that our job is to defend the liberties that make us who we are as Americans. And so that is both our life and our liberty. And when every new employee that I bring on into the division, we give them two core documents to read. One is the Church Committee report, which shows what can happen when lawyers don't play the role that they should play in terms of oversight and actual abuses of the authorities that were granted. And the other is the 9/11 report, which shows what can happen if we don't set up our legal structure in a way that allows for the effective sharing of information so we can protect ourselves against threats to do us harm. And those have to be the twin pillars that guide how we solve each problem that we confront day to day. Look, bringing the number of prosecutions that we've brought, I think, is great tactical success, and I have no doubt that lives are saved because we were able to prevent some of these individuals that are being targeted by international terrorists to commit violence here from killing innocent people across the United States. It's tactical success. Strategically, though, one of the reasons we were created as a division is because success is not the successful bringing of a criminal prosecution. Success is preventing the threat. And to prevent the threat here, we need to change strategically two things, I think, core things. One is defeat these terrorist groups where they are overseas. That's going to be less directly our folks in the National Security Division. The second, though, is how do we keep a terrorist group from exploiting what Western and American in particular minds created, built, make money off of, and is a great boon in general to society, social media. We should be the best at using this system, and right now they're exploiting it. So how do we change that strategically? And they're part of our job, I think, is just to educate.
Do you tweet?
No. I don't.
Are you on Instagram?
I neither tweet nor I am not on Instagram. I am not on. That does not. Now, I'm sure many of you who have
But
kids.
you've got other people who understand social media who are in there that are part of that in the Department of Justice.
Yes, no,
though
absolutely.
it's not you.
Well,
Yeah,
also, they don't really particularly recommend that I'm highly on social media when
I
you're
see.
in this role, because we do the terrorists and also spies and under our mandate. And I think you've heard.
So
Yeah.
just to come in, do you? I mean, I read a little bit about your division. Do we need a domestic terror statute in the U.S.?
I think it's something that, so.
Or tell us what that is, kind of
Yeah.
in short form.
I think there's been a discussion when you have a group, if there's an international terrorist group, there's a clean statute that says if it's a designated international terrorist group, then you can prosecute someone for providing support to that international terrorist group. But by design, we do not have a statute that says you can designate some group inside the United States based solely on being in the group and say it's illegal to be in the group or provide support to the group. Instead, it's based on conduct. That line, I think, makes a lot of sense, but it has caused the question, for instance, do you take as seriously if someone's motivated by a purely domestic political motivation,
Right.
but commits an act of violence? Do you take that as seriously? And we do, but it's not always reflected in the statute that we can charge. So they maybe get charged somewhere else in the federal criminal code or locally. One question that I think is worth exploring is there a change in the code that still reflects our values? So it says you committed some other crime like violence, but says there's some additional penalty if the reason why you committed that act of violence is to change political behavior. That is defined already in the federal code book, but it's not a standalone
So the
statute.
defining of who and what a domestic terrorist is that potentially a slippery slope?
So that is in the code book again, but it doesn't. It can be used for things like sentencing enhancements. Right. It could be. I mean, you have to look carefully to ensure it is not a slippery slope. But if the definition is tied to committing some other criminal offense, plus having the intention to use that criminal offense to change political behavior, that might be a way that you've seen in other statutes like hate crime statute. I'm not advocating necessarily making a change now, but it's a worthwhile discussion to have, and it would reflect what does the country want in terms of using our federal system? Do we assign that type of crime a special value different than the loss of life that occurs? Is it somehow worse, or should be separately accounted for because of the motivation?
When you look at the number of things in front of you, you've got to think about on the terrorist side. Do you ever have a good day? Is there anything promising or optimistic out there? And as you answer that question, the reason I want to set this up is John and I had an opportunity to talk at Aspen this summer, and one of the things you raised was the Internet of Things and how the kind of dense connectivity that we have. You talked about trucks and autonomous driving vehicles being tools of terror at some point. And it just, at that moment, I realized, what a comprehensively big picture this is. And as you try to balance fear in a society with trust that you're not going to have to be bothered by this crap every day, how do you guys that are so obsessed on the fear side get it right?
And I think that's a great question, and we always have to be careful in terms of talking about this publicly. Because our success would be that other people don't need to think about these threats. And so, but we have learned that it's also important for us to get out and speak more publicly than we've had before, because if you don't educate...
Is this a painful thing for you?
It is not my favorite thing to do the public events, but we've learned that, particularly with this type of threat, in order to have people prepare, and also with cyber, when they need to think about it, we need to get out and explain what we're seeing so people can take appropriate steps. When you think of Internet of Things, when we move from analog to digital as a society, in a really short period of time, in about 20 years, we moved about 98% of what we value from analog to digital, connected to the internet, and we did not think about security. We just didn't. And we made huge mistakes in terms of underestimating the cost that security would add, and now you're seeing us as a society play catch up and try to build systems that were never designed fundamentally to be secure, try to build security in. When we think about the Internet of Things, then that is, as we connect more and more physical devices so that they can connect data, and I'll use cars as an example, By 2020, 70% of the vehicles on the road are essentially going to be computers on wheels. As we make that enormous transformation in society, maybe as big as moving originally from the horse and buggy to the car, we'll be moving from a passenger-driven car to an automated car. We can't make the same mistake again. And it's on us in government then to explain, here's how we think terrorists or nation states could exploit this new technology, and to call upon the private sector to say, and this will be good for business along with safety, get it right on the front end. Think about these threats on the front end, and then it's a design flaw if you're not building in on the front end protections. It'll ultimately be a competitive advantage. And you think of an attack like Nice, where you had one individual take a truck and just mow down innocent civilians. If we've moved our trucks to be automated, it doesn't take much imagination to think, oh, a terrorist group will try to exploit that. And many of these original Internet of Things devices are being rolled out with no protection at all against hackers. And we're talking about our most sensitive areas, medical devices, trucks on the road, missile systems. So we need to get out in government and educate, not to cause fear, because I think it can be done right, but to make sure it's built in on the front end so we don't have the terrible incident after the fact.
I want to go to the audience in a moment. One of the other things we talked about was your role in tracking down people who leak things in government, who go after, and I had just seen this film by Alex Gibney called 0 Days. Have you seen it yet?
I have not.
You have not. Is that the official statement? You have not, or like you sort of did, clips? No, I mean, 0 Days, I don't know. Anybody see 0 Days? This must be the biggest flop. Phil Wilhelm is the only guy who saw. I thought it's an interesting film, but I mean, let me just cut to the chase real quick. In the film, which sort of tells Alex Gibney's story. Alex Gibney's an award-winning filmmaker. Is the story of Stuxnet, and sort of looks at how this is, and sort of these 0 Days malwares thing. Sort of computer viruses that become implanted out there in the system and sort of lurk. And since then, because I didn't have the literacy about this, and so my question is really about the literacy that has I didn't know what 0 Days was 6 months ago. And when we're seeing Hillary Clinton dragged around a lot about her lack of literacy or concern about emails at a certain point and how those should be managed. What do you think looking forward? We're looking back 15 years, but as you look forward tomorrow and the next day, when the next presidency who comes in, what are the key literacy issues that we need to be really worried about, that we might be casual about today? Are they 0 day viruses in our electric grid infrastructure? Are they things that you see that you have a literacy in that someone like myself would not? What are the big things that you would put on the table? And then we'll go to the audience.
I think there are a couple categories that are in the right now, but are going to continue on the trend. So one will be the Internet of Things. As we move more and more devices, and fundamental to the provision of the services that they provide is being digitally enabled, to the point where our workforce is not capable of fixing some of these systems anymore without doing it digitally. We need on the front end to think, and that could range from the electrical grid or Ukrainian type incidents to the next wave, which will be in our homes, in our cars, in our medical devices. Second, which is in the realm of the right now, is we need to continue to get the message out about when your kid is in your house seemingly safe, and I think we've done a decent job of this in terms of sexual predators, but not as much when I go and do outreach as terrorists, that when they're on social media, that there's this dedicated international terrorist group that's looking just to exploit troubled kids and to get that message out. That kind of figuring out how to balance what you're doing within your home versus the risks is going to be, and in terms of the companies, making sure that they understand what the threats are and provide safe platforms for what they're encouraging our children and others to use. Those are two major issues when you think about it as we go forward.
Thank you. You're going to be off the stage soon. I know you're going to feel better then. Let me take a question right here in the back over here. And we're going to do these lightning round, real fast and real fast.
Hi, John Hauge. Turkey's President Erdogan believes Fethullah Gulen, who lives in Pennsylvania, is responsible for all efforts to destabilize Turkey, including the recent attempted coup, and therefore for him, he's a terrorist. Given the U.S. terrorist elimination program, what could and should be our response if Erdogan tries to take Gulen out in Pennsylvania by drone strike or assassination?
If you can do it in 30 seconds or less.
30 seconds. Next speaker is my predecessor in National Security Division, Lisa Monaco. I'm sure she'll handle that question.
Other question, comment?
Sorry, am I up?
Oh,
yeah.
Where? Okay, yes.
Okay, sorry, really quickly, my name is Robert.
Hi,
so
Robert.
my father was actually killed on 9/11, so I want to thank most of the people here for all the great help they did.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, and one of the few perks is that the Office of Military Commissions actually invited the family members down to see the prosecutions of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other 9/11 conspirators, and I was really impressed by the genuine good faith shown by the prosecution and defense team. But they seem to be hamstrung by a lot of the complexities of international lawfare. So I'm wondering what you think the future will be for domestic terrorism cases that are prosecuted on U.S. soil with U.S. citizens that really have this international tie, and how you think the U.S. justice system can go forward.
We'll make this final word, and piggybacking on your question, if you don't mind, since those cases don't seem to be going swimmingly, could they be retried in U.S. federal courts?
So, I'm sorry for the loss, your loss, and I think what you've seen in terms of the use of our federal justice system domestically is that it's been very successful in terms of holding people to account over the years. We've brought hundreds and hundreds of cases since 9/11. Now that's, again, tactical success, but it's incredibly important. Our job can't be to measure success as prosecuting those who commit heinous attacks after the fact, but we still, it's still got to be one of the most vitally important parts of our job, as much as we continue to focus on prevention so that others are not dealing with loss in their family. When I am not optimistic in terms of using the justice system for the vast majority of individuals who have already gone into the military commission system.
So
at
those
this
tracks
point
are there
in time.
permanently.
I never we would obviously look to do everything we can to, if we were asked to hold someone to account in the federal justice system, but I'm not optimistic at this point in time, certainly for the vast majority of individuals who are there, that we could effectively hold them to account now if you were to try to transfer them into the federal criminal justice system. As we've gone forward with other individuals, they've started there, and I think we have a very good track record of holding people to account through our court system. And that's taken hard work in terms of statute changes, great work by the intelligence, law enforcement, and judges in terms of finding, as they have so many times throughout our history, a balance between protecting our essential civil liberties in order to provide for a fair trial, but also making sure that it's a fair trial where you can hold someone to account who's committed the crime.
Right. Well, thank you very much for spending time with us. I hope we can have you back and spend more time. We're going to have to get your predecessor up here on stage. But John Carlin, Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice, thank you very, very much.
Thank you.